thank Krish for making such a spirited attempt to have policy central to some of the funding that happens in the sector. I'm a proud board member of Shakti, and I do believe the nature of work Shakti does in that space is really beginning to move the needle in India. So how do we justify this definition in a manner that works in the Indian context? And what I mean by that is, I'm clearly of the view that sustainability has to be in the DNA of the organization. It has to be top down and bottoms up, and it needs to be embraced by every member that works within the company. But the dilemma today is that there's a very important notification that those of you in India at any rate are familiar with, which is that companies are going to have to disclose their spend in CSR, and that is defined as 2% of profit, and it's likely to be profit after tax, but it could even be interpreted as profit before tax, which clarifications are due shortly. So it's a large amount of money. And it would be a lost opportunity by those of us who embrace the sustainability agenda to not, if we did not get the definition to be such that enables some of the spend to be in the sustainability space. And I think one of the areas we're going to have to work at, getting beyond the semantic of is it CSR or sustainability or whatever, is just plain and simple, get the metrics in so that the board committees which are being mandated under this regulation to determine whether it fits the definition within this narrow mandate of can it be part of the 2% spend, it's going to be about defining what that 2% spend can include in the sustainability arena. And I would like to believe it could be anything which is enhanced or beyond what you would normally spend in your day-to-day business. But how are we going to measure that? How are we going to be able to defend this is going to be critical. And if all of you who are interested in this space could begin to engage to create some of those metrics and definitions, I think we could have a very major change in the way those companies in India which are not yet on the same page as typically the larger multinationals or and some of the big companies in India which have embraced sustainability as part of the agenda. But for getting the smaller ones who have not to actually use this as an agent of change to drive them into the space where they look to move up the chain in terms of sustainability. So that really just a thought and maybe a very important turning point in the Indian context. I also thought that it's important that we look at this in that, you know, I've been, well, going to Davos the last 4 or 5 years, and this is actually been a year where climate change, environment, and areas to do with water, energy, food security has grown in momentum to what I think might have been about a third of the sessions, one way or other, how you look at them, were really around this space, which tells me this particular dialogue is back in terms of the corporate space, which Davos certainly becomes a dipstick check of measuring what is it that is on the minds of CEOs. And then if one were to look at a session which was to do with supply chain and deforestation and the way that was populated with CEOs of multinationals, country ministers, from, say, Indonesia, Malaysia, and some of the concerned countries, particularly those that are producers of palm oil or natural resources, and of course the activist and NGO communities, you would certainly believe that the supply chain end of business and how businesses engage with that supply chain have become critical, both as a risk factor, but also as a way of changing the needle or moving the needle forward, in that you begin to benchmark and set best practice in terms of where you buy and how you buy. And that creates a string of other businesses, small, others, across countries which may not have embraced the best sustainability practices to move along the way. And I think that is, again, a very important mindset change which has emerged, and one that certainly countries like ours should see it as a business opportunity to begin to be engaged in those supply chains because we measure up, because we get it right. I think a third area, if I could touch on that, is finance. Being a banker, it would be difficult not to touch on an area as to how important, of course, financing is in the green financing space. And there again, I'd like to point to what I think is a very exciting new development, which is green bonds. And there's, in fact, HSBC has a research study which suggests that the market for green bonds by 2020 will be $25 billion. It's already an aspiration that it be at around $10 billion in the next couple of years. So here is a method of financing which comes available to green projects, and I would hope also therefore becomes an incentive to drive right behavior. So financing can be used as a tool to encourage best practice, as much as it is also a tool already to ensure that financing does not go to projects which don't measure up. And the constraint here, of course, for countries like ours is that we have not been signatories to the Equator Principles, as in the multinational banks are, but Indian banks are not. And what we really need is local banks in countries like India and China to sign up to this agenda as well, so that the financing moves to a platform which should be an Indian answer. It doesn't have to be a Western-driven model, but there should be a baseline below which financing is just not available because the industry is inherently polluting. So I'll leave you with these thoughts that essentially it is critical that sustainability be the DNA of the organization, but even as we look at CSR as an agenda and financing going forward, it is going to be important to articulate it in a manner that appeals to the local environment.